November 15th, 1985, 11:42 a.m. Through the tall Georgian windows of Hillsborough Castle, sunlight fell across a mahogany table. On one side sat Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, Britain's first female Prime Minister, her expression controlled but alert. Across from her, Garret FitzGerald, Ireland's Taoiseach, intellectual, historian, a man who understood that what they were about to do would be called either breakthrough or betrayal, depending on who was asked. Between them lay a document, 23 pages, months of secret negotiations condensed into carefully chosen words, the Anglo-Irish Agreement. Outside the drawing room, beyond the manicured lawns and iron gates, nearly 1,000 protesters had gathered. Their voices carried through the autumn air. Rage, fear, defiance. "Ulster says no," read the placards. Police in riot gear formed cordons. Journalists from across Europe jostled for position. Helicopters circled overhead. Inside, silence. The kind of silence that precedes earthquakes. Thatcher lifted her pen. FitzGerald reached for his. 2 signatures that would give the Republic of Ireland, a foreign government, official input into Northern Ireland's affairs for the first time since 1922. 2 signatures that would ignite Protestant fury and nationalist hope in equal measure. 2 signatures in a room that had witnessed a century of Ireland's agonies. The pens descended. Ink touched paper. In that instant, in that Georgian drawing room, in a house built 2 centuries earlier by an Anglo-Irish aristocrat who could never have imagined this moment, history split in 2 directions, before this signing and after. But this was not the first time these walls had held the weight of history, nor would it be the last. This is the story of Hillsborough Castle, a building that is not a castle, in a village granted royal status, in a country that shouldn't exist. The story of how a gentleman's country retreat became the residence of governors, the fortress of secretaries of state, the venue where peace was negotiated, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, through decades of bloodshed. From its construction in the 1770s by a family that ruled Northern Ireland before Northern Ireland existed, through partition and civil war, through the darkest days of the Troubles when armed guards patrolled these gardens, to the signing ceremonies that slowly, painfully built a fragile peace, Hillsborough has been witness, participant and symbol. How does an elegant Georgian mansion become the most politically significant building in a contested region? Why did the British government choose this house, this specific house, to represent Crown authority in Northern Ireland? And what does its transformation from closed fortress to public heritage site tell us about power, history, and the possibility of reconciliation? To answer these questions, we must go back. Back to 1770s Ireland, back to a man named Wills Hill. Back to the world of the Anglo-Irish aristocracy, that peculiar hybrid elite, Irish by residence but British by allegiance, who built grand houses on land taken from others and governed with unquestioned authority. Back to the moment when an ambitious aristocrat decided to build a country seat in County Down, never suspecting that his elegant Georgian mansion would one day become the stage where a nation's fate would be decided, again and again and again. To understand Hillsborough Castle, we must first understand the world that created it, 18th century Ireland under the Protestant ascendancy. After the Williamite War of 1688–1691, when Protestant King William III defeated Catholic King James II, Ireland was reorganised under what historians call the Protestant ascendancy, the political, economic and social domination of Ireland by the Anglican minority. Catholics, who comprised roughly 75% of Ireland's population, were excluded from Parliament, barred from owning land above a certain value, forbidden from practising law or holding military commissions. The penal laws, as this system was called, created a narrow ruling class of Protestant landowners who controlled vast estates worked by Catholic tenants. These Anglo-Irish aristocrats lived in 2 worlds. They were Irish by residence and property, but British by culture, religion and political loyalty. The Hill family epitomised this Anglo-Irish ascendancy. The Hills traced their Irish roots to the plantation of Ulster in the early 17th century, when King James I granted lands to Protestant settlers to consolidate English control over Ireland's most rebellious province. Like many planter families, the Hills accumulated property through a combination of royal grants, strategic marriages, and shrewd land purchases during the chaotic decades of the Irish Confederate Wars and Cromwellian conquest. By the early 18th century, the Hills had emerged as major landowners in County Down. But it was Wills Hill, born in 1718, who would elevate the family to the highest ranks of British aristocracy. Wills Hill was everything the Georgian aristocracy admired: educated at Oxford, well-travelled on the Grand Tour, politically astute, and blessed with both inherited wealth and family connections. His mother was a daughter of the Earl of Hillsborough, linking the Hills to England's peerage. Wills Hill's political career began in 1741 when he entered the Irish House of Commons representing Warwickshire. He quickly proved himself a capable politician, articulate, well-informed, and reliably supportive of government policy. In 1751, he was elevated to the Irish peerage as Viscount Hillsborough and Baron Hill of Kilwallin, but Wills Hill's ambitions extended beyond Ireland. In 1756, he was created Baron Harwich in the British peerage, giving him a seat in the House of Lords in London. From this platform, he would influence policy at the highest levels of British government. In 1768, Wills Hill was appointed as the first Secretary of State for the Colonies, effectively the British minister responsible for the American colonies. This was one of the most challenging positions in government. The American colonists were increasingly restive, protesting taxation without representation, resisting British military presence, organising boycotts of British goods. Wills Hill's tenure in this office was controversial. He advocated firm measures to assert British authority, supporting the coercive acts that would eventually push the colonies toward revolution. When the American Revolutionary War began in 1775, Wills Hill resigned, his hardline policies widely blamed for the colonial rebellion. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, his firm unionist principles, Wills Hill continued to rise in the aristocratic hierarchy. In 1772, he was created Earl of Hillsborough. In 1789, he was elevated to Marquess of Downshire, one of only a handful of Irish marquessates, placing him among the highest-ranking aristocrats in Ireland. Sometime in the 1770s, the exact date remains uncertain, Wills Hill, now Earl of Hillsborough, began construction of a new residence on his County Down estates. The village where he built was known simply as Hillsborough, named after his title. Why build a new house? The Hills already possessed substantial residences, but the 18th century was an age of architectural display. A great aristocrat demonstrated his status through building: the size of his house, the elegance of its proportions, the refinement of its interiors. The architect's name, frustratingly, has not survived in the historical record. This was not uncommon in 18th century Ireland, where builders and architects often remained anonymous, their work attributed simply to the patron who commissioned it. What we know is the style, Georgian architecture in its purest form. The Georgian style, named after the successive King George, who ruled Britain from 1714 to 1830, emphasised classical proportions, symmetry, restraint. It was architecture as order made visible, reflecting Enlightenment ideals of rationality and harmony. Hillsborough Castle, as it came to be called, though it was never fortified, embodied these Georgian principles perfectly. The main facade presents a composition of mathematical precision. The central block of 3 stories is flanked by lower wings, creating a subtle hierarchy that draws the eye to the centre. Windows are arranged in strict symmetry, 5 bays across on the main floor, each window precisely aligned with those above and below. The material is local stone, a warm grey that shifts tone with the Irish weather, almost white in bright sun, darkening to slate in rain. The stone is dressed, cut smooth and laid in even courses, but not polished or ornamented. This restraint is crucial to Georgian aesthetics. Grandeur comes from proportion, not decoration. The roof is slate, steep enough to shed Ireland's abundant rain, but not dramatically peaked. Tall chimneys punctuate the roofline at regular intervals, purely functional elements that nonetheless contribute to the overall composition. The entrance portico, added in a later renovation, provides the only significant ornamental feature. Ionic columns support a triangular pediment, a classical vocabulary borrowed from ancient Greece by way of Renaissance Italy and 18th century Britain. This portico announces this is a house of learning and cultivation, a residence where classical ideals of civilization are honoured. Step through the entrance and you enter the world of 18th century aristocratic life. The entrance hall was designed to impress but not overwhelm. Moderate in scale by palace standards, perhaps 30 feet long by 20 feet wide, it nonetheless commanded respect. The ceiling height of 12 feet created a sense of spaciousness without the chill that afflicted grander halls. Plasterwork cornices, moulded decoration where walls meet ceiling, provided subtle ornamentation, their patterns of acanthus leaves and egg and dart moulding derived from classical architectural orders. From the entrance hall, a central staircase ascended to the first floor, where the principal reception rooms were located. This staircase, though not grand by palace standards, was elegantly detailed. A carved wooden handrail turned balusters treads of polished oak. The drawing room, what later generations would call the throne room when the house became a royal residence, occupied the centre of the first floor. Large sash windows on two sides flooded the room with light. The walls, originally painted in fashionable Georgian colours, perhaps Adam green or Wedgwood blue, were later hung with silk damask in crimson, creating a richer, more formal atmosphere. The furniture would have been in the Georgian style, mahogany tables and chairs, their lines elegant but sturdy, designed for actual use rather than mere display. Sofas upholstered in leather or fabric, bookcases holding leather-bound volumes, the classics in Latin and Greek, contemporary literature, scientific treatises. The dining room, essential for an aristocrat whose status required regular entertaining, could accommodate perhaps 20-30 guests at a single long table. Here the Marquess would host dinners that combined pleasure with politics, where conversation ranged from agricultural improvements to parliamentary manoeuvring, where wine loosened tongues and alliances were forged. Additional rooms, a library, a music room, private sitting rooms, bedchambers, completed the house. Each was proportioned according to Georgian principles, each decorated with appropriate restraint, each designed to facilitate the rituals of aristocratic life. But a Georgian country house was never just a building. It was the centerpiece of a designed landscape, where nature was reorganized according to contemporary aesthetic ideals. The grounds at Hillsborough were laid out in the English landscape style that dominated late 18th century garden design. This style rejected the formal geometric gardens of earlier periods, the straight paths, clipped hedges and symmetrical parterres of French and Dutch design. Instead, English landscape design aimed to create natural scenery, which paradoxically required enormous artifice. At Hillsborough, the lawns swept away from the house in rolling meadows, carefully graded to create pleasing contours. Specimen trees, oak, beech, lime, were positioned to frame views and create focal points. A lake or pond likely existed, or was created, its irregular shoreline suggesting natural formation while actually being carefully engineered. Winding paths encouraged strolling and contemplation, leading visitors through a series of calculated prospects, each turn revealing a new view, each vista composed like a landscape painting. This was landscape as art, nature as theatre. The grounds also included more practical elements. Kitchen gardens supplied vegetables, fruits and herbs for the house. Greenhouses extended the growing season for delicate plants. Stables housed horses and carriages. A home farm provided dairy products, meat and grain, simultaneously ensuring self-sufficiency and providing income from surplus production. For the Marquess of Downshire and his family, Hillsborough Castle was primarily a summer residence. Like most Anglo-Irish aristocrats, the Hills divided their time between their Irish estates and London, where they maintained a townhouse for the parliamentary season. The calendar followed a predictable pattern. Spring and early summer in London for the social season, the round of balls, dinners, theatre, opera, parliamentary debates. Late summer and autumn in Ireland, overseeing the estates, hosting guests, hunting, managing the harvest. This dual existence was characteristic of the Anglo-Irish aristocracy. They were simultaneously Irish landowners and British peers, rooted in Ireland by property but oriented toward London by politics and culture. This duality would become increasingly problematic as Irish nationalism grew in the 19th century. At Hillsborough, The Marquess maintained a household staff befitting his rank. A steward managed the estate's business affairs, rent collection, farm operations, building maintenance. A butler oversaw the household's interior operations, the service of meals, the management of indoor servants, the storage and service of wine. A housekeeper supervised female servants and managed the linen, china and silver. Footmen, maids, cooks, coachmen, grooms, gardeners, perhaps 30-40 servants in total, kept the house and grounds functioning. For guests, a visit to Hillsborough offered all the pleasures of country house life, days structured around meals, breakfast taken informally, luncheon a light affair, dinner the main event at 6 or 7 p.m., lasting hours with multiple courses and flowing wine. Between meals, gentlemen might ride out to inspect the estates, fish in local streams or shoot game birds. Ladies would walk in the gardens, practice music, paint watercolours, engage in needlework, write letters. Evenings brought the company together again. After dinner, the ladies might retire to the drawing room while gentlemen remained in the dining room for port and cigars, and more important, political conversation and business dealing. Later, everyone would gather for cards, music, conversation. It was a life of leisure, yes, but leisure was itself a form of work. These social gatherings cemented political alliances, arranged marriages, negotiated business deals. The apparently idle pleasures of aristocratic life were the machinery of power. Wills Hill, first Marquess of Downshire, died in 1793. He had built a political career, created one of Ireland's premier titles, and established Hillsborough Castle as an important seat of the Hill family. The title and estates passed through successive generations, each Marquess adding to the family's prestige and property. The second Marquess served in Parliament. The third Marquess was active in agricultural reform. The fourth Marquess, born in 1812, lived through the Great Famine of 1845-1849, that catastrophic failure of the potato crop that killed 1 million Irish people and prompted another million to emigrate. The Great Famine marked a turning point in Anglo-Irish relations. The failure of the British government and Irish landlords to adequately respond to the crisis. Some landlords even evicted starving tenants who couldn't pay rent, created lasting bitterness. Irish nationalism, previously a relatively minor force, began to grow into a mass movement. By the late 19th century, the position of the Anglo-Irish aristocracy was increasingly precarious. The land war of the 1880s saw tenant farmers, organised by the Irish National Land League, withhold rent and resist evictions. British governments, recognising the need for reform, passed a series of land acts that gradually transferred property from landlords to tenants. The Anglo-Irish aristocracy's economic base was eroding. The 6th Marquess of Downshire, Arthur Wills, John Wellington, Trumbull, Blundell Sandys Roden Hill, inherited in 1905. He presided over an estate that, while still substantial, faced an uncertain future. The Irish Parliamentary Party, led by John Redmond, was pushing for Home Rule, Irish self-government within the British Empire. Unionists concentrated in Protestant Ulster vehemently opposed Home Rule, arguing it would mean Rome Rule, domination by the Catholic majority. The 6th Marquess died in 1918, just as the First World War ended and Ireland descended into the revolutionary violence that would culminate in independence. His son, Arthur Francis, became the 7th Marquess of Downshire. By 1922, the world the Hills had dominated for 2 centuries was collapsing. The Irish War of Independence had ended with the Anglo-Irish Treaty of December 1921. Ireland was partitioned. 26 counties became the Irish Free State, effectively independent within the British Commonwealth. 6 counties of Ulster, Antrim, Armagh, Down, Fermanagh, Londonderry and Tyrone, remained part of the United Kingdom as Northern Ireland. For Anglo-Irish aristocrats whose estates spanned the border, partition was catastrophic. Properties in the Free State faced Irish taxation and potential expropriation. Even in Northern Ireland, the position of the old Anglo-Irish families was diminished. The new Northern Irish government, though unionist, was dominated by middle-class Protestants, not aristocrats. The 7th Marquess of Downshire faced a stark choice: maintain multiple estates in an era of crushing taxation and political uncertainty, or consolidate. In 1922, he made his decision. He would sell Hillsborough Castle and focus on the family's other properties. The buyer was unexpected, the British government itself. The Government of Ireland Act 1920 had created Northern Ireland as a distinct region of the United Kingdom, with its own devolved government, a parliament at Stormont, a prime minister, a cabinet. But one crucial question remained: who would represent the Crown? Originally, the Act had envisioned the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland continuing to serve both Northern Ireland and what was called Southern Ireland. The Lord Lieutenant, resident in Dublin's Viceregal Lodge, would be the Crown's representative across the entire island, one of two all-Ireland institutions, along with a proposed Council of Ireland, meant to encourage eventual reunification. But the Anglo-Irish Treaty of December 1921 changed everything. Southern Ireland, which had existed only on paper, the independence movement had made it ungovernable, was replaced by the Irish Free State. The Lord Lieutenant was abolished. The Viceregal Lodge in Dublin became unavailable. Physically in a different country, politically impossible to use, Northern Ireland needed its own Crown representative. In 1922, the British government created a new office, Governor of Northern Ireland. This position combined some functions of a colonial governor with the ceremonial role of a monarch's representative. The governor would open Parliament, give royal assent to legislation, represent the Crown at official functions, and serve as a symbol of Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom. But where would this governor live? Belfast, Northern Ireland's largest city and industrial centre, lacked a suitable official residence. The city's grand Victorian buildings were commercial or municipal, not residential. Building a new residence would be expensive and time-consuming. Then the government learned that Hillsborough Castle was for sale. Hillsborough offered several advantages. First, it already existed, an elegant country house requiring no construction, only modest renovations. Second, its location in County Down, roughly equidistant from Belfast and the border with the Free State, was politically neutral. It wasn't in Belfast, dominated by working-class Protestant Unionists and Catholic nationalists in uneasy proximity. It wasn't near the border, where tensions ran high. It was in quiet, rural County Down, where the Protestant ascendancy had always been secure. Third, the house itself sent the right message. Georgian architecture symbolized stability, order, British civilization. Its elegant proportions and restrained decoration suggested dignified government rather than imperial grandeur. This mattered in 1922, when British imperial confidence was shaken, when the loss of most of Ireland was a humiliation, when Northern Ireland's creation felt defensive rather than triumphant. Fourth, the grounds could accommodate the security, staff, and infrastructure a governor would require. The estate was large enough to ensure privacy, to create barriers between the official residence and potential threats, to establish a genuine viceregal presence. Finally, the price was right. The 7th Marquess, desperate to sell in a depressed market, accepted what the government offered. While specific figures aren't recorded, the purchase price was certainly far below what the estate would have commanded in peacetime. Upon acquisition, Hillsborough Castle underwent significant renovations to adapt it for governmental use. The work, overseen by government architects and completed by 1925, transformed a gentleman's residence into an official residence. The throne room was created from what had been the main drawing room. A ceremonial throne, representing royal authority, was installed, along with formal drapery and royal insignia. This room would host investitures, official receptions, and ceremonies, requiring the governor's presence as the monarch's representative. State dining rooms were enhanced to accommodate larger official dinners. The kitchen and service areas were expanded and modernized to handle formal entertaining on a scale beyond normal domestic hospitality. Private apartments were designated for the governor and his family, separate from public reception rooms. This separation was crucial. The governor needed private space apart from official duties, a place where family life could continue away from the ceremonial demands of office. Offices were created for the governor's staff, a private secretary, aides de camp, military officers who assisted with ceremonial duties, clerks, and household staff. What had been bedrooms or secondary reception rooms became working spaces, equipped with telephones, filing systems, and the infrastructure of modern administration. Security measures were implemented. Gates, fencing, guardhouses, the visible apparatus of protection. The grounds were surveyed and monitored. Though Northern Ireland in the 1920s was relatively peaceful compared to what would come, the governor's residence required protection. Upon completion of renovations, the building was officially renamed Government House, though most people continued calling it Hillsborough Castle. The first governor of Northern Ireland was James Albert Edward Hamilton, 3rd Duke of Abercorn. The appointment, announced in 1922, was carefully calculated. The Duke of Abercorn was one of Ulster's premier aristocrats. His family had been major landowners in counties Tyrone and Donegal for centuries. He was Protestant, Unionist, and impeccably connected, related to much of the British aristocracy through marriage and descent. But he was also, notably, not a member of the old Anglo-Irish ascendancy in the traditional sense. The Hamiltons were Scottish in origin, their Irish properties acquired through marriage and royal favour. They'd always been more oriented toward London than Dublin, more British than Anglo-Irish. This made Abercorn perfect for Northern Ireland's identity as distinctly British, not Irish. The Duke moved into Hillsborough Castle, soon renamed Government House, during 1925. The move was significant enough that he planted a commemorative tree, an Abies albertiana, in October 1925, a living marker of this new chapter in the building's history. That tree still stands in the grounds today, a century-old witness to all that followed. The Duke of Abercorn's tenure as governor, 1922-1945, established the rhythms of life at Government House. It was simultaneously domestic and ceremonial, private and public. Official duties dominated the calendar. The governor opened each session of the Northern Ireland Parliament at Stormont, reading a speech written by the Northern Irish government outlining the legislative programme. He attended official functions across Northern Ireland, opening hospitals, unveiling war memorials, presenting awards, inspecting troops. He hosted garden parties, diplomatic receptions, and state dinners at Government House. But between these duties, life continued in relatively normal patterns. The Duke and his family lived at Government House as their home, not merely as an office. Children played in the grounds. The Duchess managed the household. Family and friends visited. The staff required to run Government House was substantial. Beyond the governor's official staff, private secretary, aides-de-camp, clerks, the house required a full domestic staff. Butler, footman, maids, cooks, kitchen staff, gardeners, chauffeurs, security personnel. Perhaps 50-60 people in total worked at Government House, a small community unto itself. The grounds continued to evolve. Gardens were maintained and enhanced. The tradition of commemorative tree planting, begun by the Duke of Abercorn, continued, with subsequent governors and distinguished visitors each planting a tree. Over decades, these trees created a living record of the residence's history, each specimen marking a particular person or event. When World War II began in September 1939, Northern Ireland found itself in a unique position. Unlike the Irish Free State, now called Éire, which remained neutral, Northern Ireland was fully committed to Britain's war effort. Belfast's shipyards built warships. Factories produced munitions and aircraft. American forces used Northern Ireland as a staging ground for the Atlantic War. Government House adapted to wartime demands. Security increased dramatically. The governor was a target for Irish Republican groups who opposed Northern Ireland's existence and its support for Britain. Blackout curtains covered the windows. Air raid precautions were implemented, though County Down was relatively safe from German bombing, unlike Belfast, which suffered devastating raids in 1941. The Duke of Abercorn, then in his 70s, continued his duties throughout the war. He visited bombed areas of Belfast, toured military installations, hosted Allied officers, and maintained the ceremonial routines that provided continuity and stability. American and British military leaders visited Government House. Discussions of strategy, coordination between Allied forces, diplomatic receptions, the house became a venue for high-level wartime cooperation. Its location, away from Belfast's industrial targets yet accessible by road and rail, made it ideal for confidential meetings. The war years were perhaps Government House's finest hour in its governmental role. It functioned as intended, a stable symbol of British authority and order in the midst of global chaos. The Duke of Abercorn retired in 1945, having served 23 years as governor. His successor was William Spencer Leveson Gower, 4th Earl Granville, who served from 1945 to 1952. The post-war governors, Lord Wakehurst, Lord Erskine, and Lord Grey, each maintained Government House's traditions while adapting to changing times. But Northern Ireland itself was changing. The post-war decades saw the growth of the civil rights movement among the Catholic minority, who faced discrimination in housing, employment, and voting rights. Tensions mounted through the 1960s. In 1968, civil rights marches were met with violence. In 1969, British troops deployed to Northern Ireland to restore order. The Troubles had begun. In August 1969, sectarian rioting exploded across Northern Ireland. In Belfast and Derry, Protestant mobs attacked Catholic neighbourhoods. Police, largely Protestant and Unionist, failed to protect Catholic residents. In some cases, actively participated in attacks. Houses burned. People died. The Northern Irish government, overwhelmed, requested British military assistance. British troops deployed to Belfast and Derry, initially welcomed by Catholics as protectors against loyalist violence. Government House suddenly found itself the residence of a Crown representative in a region descending into civil conflict. Lord Grey, the governor at the time, presided over an office that was increasingly irrelevant. Real power lay with the British government in London, which now directly intervened in Northern Irish affairs. The Northern Irish Parliament at Stormont, dominated by Unionists since its creation, was seen as part of the problem, not the solution. On March 24, 1972, British Prime Minister Edward Heath announced the suspension of the Northern Ireland Parliament and the imposition of direct rule from London. The 50-year experiment in Northern Irish self-government was over. With the abolition of Stormont came the abolition of the governor's office. Lord Grey was the last governor of Northern Ireland. The office he represented, symbolising Northern Ireland's autonomy within the UK, had become unsustainable. But what would happen to Government House? The building remained British government property, and Northern Ireland still needed an official residence for Crown representatives and visiting dignitaries. Direct rule required a new structure. The position of Secretary of State for Northern Ireland was created, a British cabinet minister, who would govern Northern Ireland directly from London, bypassing the defunct Northern Irish Parliament. The Secretary of State would be the Queen's representative in Northern Ireland, not with the ceremonial role of a governor, but with real executive power. Every law, every administrative decision, every political initiative in Northern Ireland would require the Secretary of State's approval, and the Secretary of State would reside, when in Northern Ireland, at the building formerly known as Government House. Hillsborough Castle, as most still called it, would continue as an official residence, but with a new and darker significance. The 1970s transformed Hillsborough Castle from a gentleman's residence with modest security to a fortress. The Provisional IRA, the most militant Republican group, had declared war on British rule in Northern Ireland. Their tactics included bombings, assassinations, and attacks on security forces and political figures. The Secretary of State was an obvious target. Killing the British minister responsible for Northern Ireland would be a tremendous propaganda victory. Security measures escalated dramatically. The perimeter walls were raised and reinforced. Checkpoints controlled access. Security cameras monitored the grounds. Armed police and soldiers patrolled continuously. Visitors underwent thorough searches. The once open grounds, which local people had occasionally enjoyed, became a forbidden zone. Inside the house, security dictated routine. Reinforced doors and windows, panic rooms, secure communications equipment. The elegant Georgian rooms now contained the apparatus of counter-terrorism. For secretaries of state, residence at Hillsborough meant living under constant threat. Several secretaries received specific death threats. In 1979, the IRA assassinated Airy Neave, a Conservative MP and Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, with a car bomb in the House of Commons car park. The message was clear. No one was safe. Yet despite the danger, Hillsborough Castle continued to function as a residence and increasingly as a venue for political negotiations. Through the 1980s and 1990s, as violence continued, but political efforts toward peace accelerated, Hillsborough Castle became a key venue for negotiations. The building offered advantages for sensitive talks. Its isolation provided privacy. Negotiations could occur without press and protesters immediately outside. Its security ensured protection for participants. Its setting, elegant, formal, historically significant, created an atmosphere conducive to serious discussion, and its very existence symbolised something important: British governmental commitment to Northern Ireland. Unlike Stormont, associated with Unionist dominance, or Dublin, representing Irish nationalism, Hillsborough was neutral ground where British, Irish, Unionist and nationalist representatives could meet. The Anglo-Irish Agreement, signed at Hillsborough Castle on November 15, 1985, represented a watershed moment in Northern Ireland's history. British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and Irish Taoiseach Garret FitzGerald negotiated for months, trying to create a framework that would satisfy both British security concerns and Irish nationalist aspirations while respecting Unionist positions. The agreement granted the Irish government a consultative role in Northern Ireland's governance through a joint British-Irish intergovernmental conference. It affirmed that Northern Ireland's constitutional status couldn't change without majority consent, but acknowledged that if a majority ever voted for Irish unity, the British government would facilitate it. For Unionists, this was betrayal. They hadn't been consulted. An Irish government, a foreign government, now had official input into Northern Ireland's affairs. Massive protests erupted. The Ulster Unionist MP for South Down, Enoch Powell, declared, "The Union is safe in no one's hands but our own." For nationalists, the agreement was inadequate but meaningful, the first time since partition that Dublin had a formal role in Northern Ireland. The signing at Hillsborough was deliberately symbolic. Television cameras captured Thatcher and FitzGerald at the mahogany table, the historic house providing gravitas to the moment. Protesters outside raged, but inside, history turned. The Anglo-Irish Agreement didn't end violence. The next decade saw some of the worst atrocities of the Troubles, but it established a principle. Northern Ireland's future would be determined through negotiation, not force. Hillsborough Castle hosted numerous rounds of talks through the 1990s. Secretary of State Peter Brooke initiated talks in 1991. His successor, Patrick Maherne, continued negotiations. When Labour came to power in 1997, Secretary of State Mo Mowlam brought new energy to the peace process. Mowlam made a significant gesture in April 1999. She opened Hillsborough Castle's grounds to the public for the first time. For nearly 3 decades, the house had been a closed fortress. Now, on designated days, ordinary people could walk the grounds where governors and secretaries of state had strolled, where political decisions had been made, where history had occurred. This opening symbolised a broader opening, the possibility that Northern Ireland might move beyond violence toward a political settlement. The Good Friday Agreement, also called the Belfast Agreement, signed on April 10, 1998, wasn't signed at Hillsborough, but at Stormont. Yet Hillsborough had been crucial to its creation. Many preliminary negotiations occurred there, many crisis meetings when talks threatened to collapse. The agreement established power sharing between Unionists and nationalists, created north-south bodies linking Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, affirmed the principle of consent — Northern Ireland's status couldn't change without majority support — and committed all parties to exclusively peaceful means. The agreement was approved by referendum both in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Implementation would be difficult. Crises and suspensions would plague the new power-sharing government, but the framework for peace was established. Hillsborough Castle could finally transition from fortress to something closer to what it had been, a residence and ceremonial venue. Throughout its governmental period, Hillsborough Castle maintained another role: official residence in Northern Ireland for the British monarch and other royals visiting the region. Royal visits to Northern Ireland during the Troubles were fraught. Security concerns limited visits. When royals did come, their movements were carefully controlled, their itineraries secret until the last moment, their protection massive. But Hillsborough provided a secure base. The Queen stayed at Hillsborough during her Golden Jubilee tour in 2002, a significant visit that demonstrated her commitment to Northern Ireland despite decades of violence. Prince Philip accompanied her, and the visit went smoothly, a testament both to improved security and to changing attitudes. The royal connection gave Hillsborough a unique status. It was simultaneously a working government residence and a royal palace, one of only a handful of properties in the UK serving both functions. On April 8, 2003, Hillsborough Castle hosted one of the most significant international meetings in its history. US President George W. Bush, British Prime Minister Tony Blair, and Irish Taoiseach Bertie Ahern met at Hillsborough to discuss both the Iraq War, then in its early stages, and Northern Ireland's peace process. The choice of venue was deliberate. Bush wanted to demonstrate American support for the Northern Irish peace process. Meeting at Hillsborough, not London, not Dublin, not Belfast, sent a message. Northern Ireland matters. Its peace matters internationally. The image of three leaders walking through Hillsborough's grounds, followed by press cameras, beamed worldwide. The Georgian mansion, once a symbol of British rule, now represented international cooperation toward peace. In January 2010, Hillsborough hosted another crucial negotiation. The Northern Irish power-sharing government faced collapse over policing issues, specifically the devolution of justice and policing powers from London to Belfast, and whether unionists would support Sinn Féin, the former political wing of the IRA, having a role in policing. British Prime Minister Gordon Brown and Irish Taoiseach Brian Cowan came to Hillsborough to mediate between Democratic Unionist Party, DUP, and Sinn Féin leaders. For 3 days, negotiations continued. The stakes were high. Failure might collapse the power-sharing government and return Northern Ireland to direct rule or worse. The Hillsborough Castle Agreement of February 5, 2010, resolved the crisis. Justice and policing powers would be devolved. The institutions survived. Northern Ireland's fragile peace held. Once again, Hillsborough had been the venue where Northern Ireland's future was decided. By the 2010s, Northern Ireland had changed dramatically. Violence was rare. Power sharing, though unstable, functioned. Tourism was growing. The region's troubled past was becoming history rather than present reality. In this context, the British government made a significant decision: transfer management of Hillsborough Castle to Historic Royal Palaces, the independent charity that manages Tower of London, Hampton Court Palace, Kensington Palace, and other historic properties. The transfer, effective April 2014, acknowledged Hillsborough's dual nature. It remained an official government residence. The Secretary of State still used it. The Queen still stayed there on visits. But it was also a historic building of national significance that the public deserved to access. Historic royal palaces began offering public tours. For the first time, ordinary visitors could see inside the house, walk through the throne room, see the state dining rooms, learn the building's history. The response was enthusiastic. Northern Ireland residents and tourists alike wanted to see this building they'd heard about but never accessed. The opening wasn't complete. Security concerns meant some areas remained off-limits, visits required advance booking, and the house closed when official functions occurred. But it was a profound change from the fortress of the Troubles. In April 2014, Prince Charles, Prince of Wales, now King Charles III, held an investiture at Hillsborough Castle, the first investiture in Northern Ireland since the building became a royal residence. An investiture is a ceremony where the monarch, or a royal representative, personally presents honours, knighthoods, orders of the British Empire, medals for service or bravery. They're deeply symbolic, representing the Crown's recognition of individual achievement. That this investiture occurred at Hillsborough, in Northern Ireland, was significant. For decades, Northern Ireland residents receiving honours had to travel to Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle. Now, the ceremony came to them, in their own region, in a building that represented Northern Ireland's unique place in the United Kingdom. Prince Charles presented honours to dozens of Northern Ireland residents, recognising achievements in business, education, public service and community development. The ceremony, broadcast on television, showed Hillsborough at its best, elegant, dignified, serving its ceremonial function perfectly. On September 8, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II died at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. Her son became King Charles III. The new king immediately undertook a tour of the United Kingdom, visiting Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, to receive condolences and reaffirm the unity of the realm. On September 13, 2022, King Charles III and Queen Camilla visited Hillsborough Castle. They received an official message of condolence from the Northern Ireland executive. Outside the castle, thousands gathered, both to mourn the Queen and to see the new king. The visit was brief but symbolically crucial. By coming to Hillsborough, by receiving condolences there, Charles affirmed Northern Ireland's place in his kingdom. The castle, once a symbol of contested authority, now represented accepted constitutional order. Since 2014, Hillsborough Castle has operated as both working government residence and public heritage site. This dual function requires careful management. Public tours managed by historic royal palaces run throughout most of the year. Visitors book online, arrive at designated times, and tour the house with trained guides. The route includes the throne room, state dining rooms, principal reception rooms, and selected private areas. The guides explain the building's history, its architectural significance, and its role in Northern Ireland's political history. The tours are popular. Northern Ireland residents come to see a building they've heard about for decades but couldn't access. Tourists from Britain, Ireland, and internationally include Hillsborough on itineraries alongside Belfast's Titanic Museum and the Giant's Causeway. The building's role in recent political history, particularly the Anglo-Irish Agreement and peace process, attracts visitors interested in contemporary history, but the house still functions governmentally. When the Secretary of State visits, when royal family members stay, when diplomatic functions occur, public access is restricted. This creates logistical challenges but also demonstrates the building's continuing relevance. The 100 acres of grounds surrounding Hillsborough Castle are themselves historically significant. The landscape, though altered over centuries, retains Georgian bones, the flowing lines, specimen trees, and calculated views of 18th century design. But the grounds also contain more recent history. The commemorative trees planted by successive governors, distinguished visitors, and royals create a living archive. Each tree, labelled with plaques identifying who planted it and when, tells a story. The Duke of Abercorn's 1925 Abies Albertiana still stands, now nearly 100 years old, marking the building's transformation into government house. Trees planted by Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip record royal visits. Trees planted by Secretaries of State mark their tenures. Trees planted during peace negotiations symbolise hope for reconciliation. Recent additions reflect Hillsborough's evolving role. In 2014, when management transferred to historic royal palaces, a commemorative planting occurred. In 2022, trees were planted to mark Queen Elizabeth II's Platinum Jubilee, just months before her death. The gardens themselves have been restored and enhanced. Walled gardens, probably original to the 18th century design, have been rehabilitated with period-appropriate plantings. A rose garden provides colour through summer. Woodland walks allow visitors to experience the grounds' scale. Importantly, the grounds are accessible even when the house is closed for official functions. This allows continuous public engagement with the site, maintaining the principle established in 1999 when Momolam first opened the grounds. Hillsborough Castle faces the challenges confronting all historic buildings: ageing infrastructure, changing needs, conservation requirements. The building is not listed, Northern Ireland's equivalent of England's listed building protections, but its management by historic royal palaces ensures professional conservation standards. Ongoing work includes roof repairs, window restoration, masonry conservation, and interior preservation. Modern requirements must be integrated sensitively. Heating, electrical, plumbing, and communication systems need updating, but in ways that don't compromise historic fabric. Security measures must protect without defacing. Accessibility requirements, particularly for disabled visitors, must be met while preserving architectural integrity. The throne room, state dining rooms, and principal reception areas are maintained in formal splendour, ready for official use at short notice. But other areas have been adapted for modern functions: historic royal palaces offices, visitor facilities, storage for furniture and artefacts currently in conservation. This adaptive approach reflects contemporary heritage management philosophy. Historic buildings survive by being useful. Museums frozen in time deteriorate. buildings that evolve while preserving their essential character endure. Among British royal and governmental residences, Hillsborough Castle occupies a unique position. It's smaller and less grand than Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle or Holyrood Palace, the monarch's official Scottish residence. It lacks the medieval heritage of the Tower of London or the Tudor magnificence of Hampton Court. But Hillsborough has something those palaces lack: direct, lived connection to contemporary political history. The Anglo-Irish agreement wasn't signed at Buckingham Palace or Windsor, it was signed at Hillsborough. The crucial negotiations of Northern Ireland's peace process didn't occur at Hampton Court. They occurred at Hillsborough. This makes Hillsborough intensely relevant to understanding modern British history. The building isn't just preserved architecture, it's an active participant in ongoing political and constitutional processes. Despite Northern Ireland's troubled history, the British royal family has maintained connection to the region through Hillsborough Castle. When royals visit Northern Ireland, for official duties, ceremonial occasions or personal interest, Hillsborough serves as their base. Prince Charles, now King Charles III, has visited frequently, staying at Hillsborough and using it as headquarters for Northern Irish engagements. Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, have stayed at Hillsborough during visits. These royal visits, once rare and dangerous during the Troubles, are now routine. That normalcy itself represents progress. Northern Ireland has become safe enough that royals can visit without extraordinary security, stay at Hillsborough without turning it into an armed camp, engage with residents without fear of attack. The royal connection also provides economic benefit. Royal visits attract media attention, promoting Northern Ireland tourism. Hillsborough Castle's association with the royal family enhances its appeal to tourists who might otherwise not visit. Though the office of Secretary of State for Northern Ireland continues, its role has changed. With the restoration of devolved government, however unstable, the Secretary of State is less a direct ruler and more an overseer, intervening when the Northern Irish institutions fail, but otherwise allowing local government to function. When in Northern Ireland, the Secretary of State still uses Hillsborough Castle as an official residence and meeting venue. Important political discussions still occur there. But the atmosphere is dramatically different from the crisis-driven meetings of the Troubles era. Recent Secretaries of State have used Hillsborough for both official functions and symbolic gestures, hosting cross-community events, gatherings that bring together unionist and nationalist politicians, religious leaders from different traditions, community representatives from divided neighbourhoods, demonstrates commitment to reconciliation. The building itself facilitates this. The elegant, neutral Georgian architecture doesn't favour any political tradition. The grounds provide space for informal conversation away from the formal negotiating table. The historical weight encourages participants to think beyond immediate crises toward longer perspectives. Stand at the gates of Hillsborough Castle today, and you see a beautiful Georgian mansion set in manicured grounds. Tourists photograph the elegant facade. Visitors stroll the gardens. The scene is peaceful, even idyllic. But these stones remember. They remember Will's Hill, first Marquess of Downshire, building his country seat in the confident decades of Anglo-Irish ascendancy, when Protestant landowners ruled Ireland with unquestioned authority. They remember the 7th Marquess, forced to sell as that world collapsed, as Irish independence shattered the comfortable certainties of the 18th century. They remember the Duke of Abercorn planting his commemorative tree in 1925, marking Government House's new role as the official residence of the Governor of Northern Ireland. That curious creation, a region that shouldn't have needed to exist. They remember the darkness of the Troubles, when the house became a fortress, when armed guards patrolled the walls, when every visitor was a potential threat, when the elegant rooms hosted not garden parties, but crisis negotiations. They remember Margaret Thatcher and Garret FitzGerald signing the Anglo-Irish agreement, protesters raging outside, history pivoting on the point of a pen. They remember the slow, difficult peace process, the endless rounds of talks, the crises and breakthroughs, the gradual emergence from violence toward politics. They remember Queen Elizabeth II staying here during her Golden Jubilee, Prince Charles holding Northern Ireland's first investiture, President Bush meeting with Prime Minister Blair and Taoiseach Ahern. They remember opening to the public in 2014, after decades as a closed fortress, allowing ordinary people to finally see inside, to walk these halls where so much history occurred. They remember King Charles III arriving in 2022 as a new monarch, receiving condolences for his mother, affirming continuity. Hillsborough Castle's Georgian architecture, symmetrical, proportioned, rational, seems to embody order and reason. But the building's history reveals something more complex: how a physical structure can hold contradictory meanings simultaneously. For Unionists, Hillsborough represented British authority, the Crown's commitment to Northern Ireland's place in the United Kingdom. For nationalists, it symbolised British rule, the denial of Irish unity. For the British government, it was simultaneously a practical necessity and a diplomatic tool. For locals, it was a closed mystery, a beautiful building they could see but not access. These contradictory meanings didn't cancel each other out. They coexisted, sometimes uncomfortably, reflecting Northern Ireland's own contradictions. British, yet Irish, Unionist, yet nationalist, divided, yet shared. The building survived because it could hold these contradictions. A less flexible structure, architecturally or politically, might have been destroyed. Hillsborough endured by adapting, by serving different masters, by being simultaneously many things. Hillsborough Castle's story illuminates how power operates through buildings. Physical presence matters. The British government bought Hillsborough to solve a practical problem: where to house the governor. But that practical solution had profound symbolic effects. By placing the Crown's representative in an elegant country house rather than an urban palace, by choosing County Down rather than Belfast, by occupying a Georgian mansion rather than building a modern government complex, the government made statements about what Northern Ireland was and should be. Those statements weren't always successful. During the Troubles, Hillsborough's elegance and tradition couldn't prevent violence. But even then, the building played a role, as venue for negotiations, as symbol of governmental continuity, as place where peace was slowly, painfully constructed. Hillsborough's transformation from private aristocratic seat to government residence and then to public heritage site mirrors the broader fate of British country houses in the 20th century. The Anglo-Irish aristocracy, which built Hillsborough and houses like it, largely disappeared. Death duties, agricultural depression, political change, all the forces that destroyed country house culture across Britain operated with particular intensity in Ireland. Yet Hillsborough survived precisely because it left private ownership. Had the 7th Marquess retained it, the house would likely have suffered the fate of many Irish country houses: decay, demolition, or conversion to institutional use: hotel, school, nursing home. Government ownership, though it changed the building's character, preserved it. The British government had resources to maintain the structure, motivation to preserve an official residence, and eventually commitment to open it to the public. This paradox, that public ownership saved a private aristocratic seat, suggests something important about heritage conservation. Buildings survive not through nostalgia, but through continued use. Hillsborough endures because it remains useful, as official residence, as royal palace, as heritage site, as venue for important events. What lies ahead for Hillsborough Castle? Several factors will shape its future. First, the stability of Northern Ireland's political institutions. If power sharing endures, if the fragile peace holds, Hillsborough's governmental role may diminish further. It will be less a venue for crisis negotiations, more a ceremonial residence. If institutions collapse again, Hillsborough might return to prominence as a centre of direct rule. Second, the evolution of the British monarchy. King Charles III has made clear his commitment to a slimmed-down monarchy, with fewer working royals and reduced expenditure. Will this affect how Hillsborough functions? Will royal visits become rarer? Or will Hillsborough's relative modesty, it's not a vast palace, make it suitable for the modern monarchy Charles envisions? Third, tourism and heritage access. Demand for heritage tourism continues growing. Hillsborough could potentially increase public access, offer more extensive tours, develop its grounds further, but this must balance with its continuing official functions. Fourth, climate change and conservation. Like all historic buildings, Hillsborough faces environmental challenges. Changing weather patterns affecting stone and timber, heating and cooling requirements conflicting with conservation needs, flood risk from changing precipitation. Managing these challenges while preserving the building's historic character will require ongoing investment and expertise. If Hillsborough Castle teaches anything, it's this. History isn't made only in palaces and parliaments. It happens in Georgian drawing rooms where politicians negotiate. It happens in grounds where protesters gather. It happens when an Anglo-Irish aristocrat builds a country seat, when a government buys a building to solve a problem, when a Secretary of State opens gardens to the public, when a royal plants a tree. Buildings matter. They shape how power operates, how history unfolds, how people understand their past and imagine their future. Hillsborough Castle, never a real castle, always something more and less than it seemed, stands as witness to a century of Irish and British history. It watched empire dissolve, violence erupt, peace emerge. It served governors and secretaries of state, hosted royals and presidents, sheltered negotiations that changed a nation. The Georgian mansion that Wills Hill built in the 1770s couldn't have imagined this future, but it stands still, elegant and adaptable, ready for whatever comes next.